going to change gears a little bit. Just moved next door from Ed Ricketts, down the row a couple doors to Knut Hovden, and proud to introduce Lewis Ray. A lot of you recognize Lewis. He's worked for us for quite a while here at the aquarium. In his spare time, when he isn't working with guests out there, he has spent a lot of time digging into Knut Hovden's background. And Hovden's this kind of shadowy figure. There's not a lot known about him, or I didn't think so until Lewis started doing a little digging. And we got put together quite a few pieces of Knut Hovden's puzzle. So take it away, Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jerry, for coming. Thank you so very, very much. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Jim's absolutely right. This has been just a labor of love over the last several years. Honestly, it was mostly on my coffee breaks and lunch hours. But I found this big question when I first came here. I like history in general. I've certainly never been a master of it. But I came walking in the front door, and I saw this huge exhibit right in the front door. It's the second largest exhibit in the entire place. That is the Hovden Boiler exhibit. And I asked around, and most of us only know a few sentences about it. Something simple, the founders insisted on keeping it. Why, where, how? Well, I think it takes an appreciation of Mr. Hovden himself. And I'm going to endeavor not to call him Knut. You are welcome to catch me on that. He insisted throughout his entire life on being called K. Hovden, and that's a story that we'll come back to in just a few minutes. But for the moment, I'd like to go ahead and let you know a little bit more about the king of Cannery Row, Mr. Knut Hovden, heretofore referred to as K. Mr. Hovden is one of the reasons that we're all here. Had he not done what he did at the time that he did, Cannery Row wouldn't have existed as we know it, for sure, certainly in its industrialized way. And his influence started early, but you have to rewind to know what he was coming into. If you were looking for a place, say 1850, 1860 around here, there was only one name to talk to, and that was David Jacks, and he controlled huge portions of this area. While I'm talking about Mr. Hovden, I also want to focus on this piece of land where we're standing. Don was careful to point out, this is unquestionably the birthplace of marine conservation as we know it. And so this piece of land, trading hands back and forth, I think it shows us a real efficient balance of the conservation ethic that we've all come to know and love, and the inevitable commercialism, the inevitable capitalism that has been the other side of that balance for at least 150 years. But so, starting with David Jacks eventually passed the land along to the Pacific Improvement Company. As we know, the land between here and what we call Hopkins was a fishing village with Chinese settlers who were here as of about 1850, I think the very early 1850s, and they stayed there for quite some while, had a wonderful location up until, of course, 1906. Now, right about the turn of the century, things around here were hopping. The fishing industry had just really taken over the West Coast. Canning and preserving of foods in general was just taking off. The Industrial Revolution had really just kicked. France, a town called Nantes, France, had begun the tradition and the technologies of canning foods. So this fellow named Booth is up and down the West Coast. He comes from a long line of canners, and he has been back and forth across this coast. He's starting canneries up here, he's starting canneries elsewhere, and most importantly, he's interested in technology. Booth understood that you could take a machine and do what people would otherwise have to do. In the beginning, of course, we had a little bit of a sardine industry here. Everything, the salmon obviously started our industry, but as sardines came along, everyone was still hand soldering things in these days. So there wasn't much downtown. The railroad just coming through completely changed. Pacific Improvement Company really changed this area. Now you can have goods coming in and goods going out very quickly. And that is really what made Cannery Row possible. You can stop by the Wharf Marketplace if you get a chance. They have excellent coffee down there, lovely. But it's changed a little bit in the last 100 years for sure. So the Monterey Peninsula just beginning to boom. The technology, the settlements just beginning to take off. I was really surprised to find that Eleanor Scripps was one of the players in the Ed Ricketts category, and she was also one of the major funders for the Asilomar project. But that's the topic for another discussion. I love these. Every time I listen to Don, I learn something new. But about this time, if you're talking about where we are, here it is. This is referred to as Point Alones. Now, whether this is referring to the natives of this area, or whether it has been confused with Point Alone, or whether it is referring to the French word for abalone, or there are, believe me, a number of debates as to the source of the word, but we're going to refer to this place for now as Point Alones. And I believe the general consensus is it's named after the natives of this area. So the place is hopping, and wait a minute, that's not Monterey. Not exactly, this is halfway around the world. This is Bergen, Norway, about 1880. Knut Hovden's just been born there. Knut Hovden, born in Bergen, Norway, a sickly child, born in the middle of winter. No one expected him to live. And honestly, his parents didn't name him. The midwife gave him a name just so that the child would have a Christian burial. No one expected the kid to last more than a few days. Well, he spent the rest of his life defying people's expectations. But nonetheless, the name given to him was Knut. He insisted that that was a that was a Danish name, not a Norwegian name, and therefore he would not be called Knut, that silly Danish label, and insisted on being called K for the rest of his life. But Bergen, about that time, Norway in general, was a major fishing industry. The Norwegians, of course, been fishing for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. They kind of figured out the business. So about this time, Knut gets himself, he's born in 1880. By about 1900, he's getting a few stipends. He's traveling to England for the study of vormranging of fiskprodukter. If anybody here speaks Norwegian, please help me out. There's going to be several places you're going to see this, but basically he studied the preservation of fish. Anybody here had lutefisk before? You can understand why he was exploring alternate methods, for certain. But so around 1900 or so, he's doing very well. He's got himself a commission. He's studied. I understand he also traveled to Nantes, France, the birthplace of conservation. And about this time, of course, we're getting a little bit of an industry here. The very beginnings. A fellow named Rhames comes in and decides he's going to get people to can some of these fish. Now, he'll can just about anything. You'll find most of the canners on Cannery Row, we refer to a sardine industry, but they would can just about anything. It's just a big machine. You can put anything in the can, believe me. But he started with some salmon, experimented with a couple of other fish here. Couldn't quite get the industry to take off, so in the daytimes he would can. At the night times, he would open his place as a dance hall. The Rhames dance hall was very popular for quite a while. These are a couple of tokens. You can still find them at a few collectors' sites online. You probably can't read it from here, but it's good for one glass of beer at H.R. Hovden Cannery and Dance Hall. Whatever it takes to subsidize the business, I guess. So the industry really hadn't taken off at that point for sure, although we certainly had the potential. The Sicilians, for example, and their fishing methods were just coming in around here. We had the first few visions of the Lampara net, the first few uses. They're doing better things with the lawn at Colton Hall now, very thankfully. At this point, it really was mostly managed by the horses and the burros who were visiting town. So, cut back to Norway. Knut Hovden, K, has himself a great job. He's in Ålesund. At Ålesund, Norway, little fishing town. They have begun a fish balls business where they preserve the little balls of fish and sell them. He's got some English partners. Well, Ålesund, Norway, beautiful, beautiful town of about 1,100. Ålesund one night burnt to the ground. Yeah, 1904. There are multiple witnesses' accounts that declare for sure that the fire started in the smokehouse. Now, guess who was in charge of the smokehouse at Ålesund, Norway? Yes, it was our own friend K. Hovden. Now, whether it was he himself who was responsible for taking the entire town to the ground, as about 850 out of 1,100 homes were destroyed. It wasn't a pretty picture. Interesting, though, that Ålesund experienced a rebirth from this. The town was rebuilt in an Art Deco and a Nouveau style, and it actually became a cultural center later on. But it rose from the ashes. The credit for the accident lies squarely on a few laborers in the smokehouse. Yes, they say that alcohol was very likely involved. Incidentally, I have the transcripts of everyone's testimonies, and if you speak Norwegian, I'd love to hear from you for sure. So coincidentally, Mr. Hovden is on a boat for America within a few weeks. Yes, he set out and landed here in March, just at the end of March. It's interesting that later on in life he claims that he left town on February 18th, although his testimony was for sure on the record February 24th. I'll just leave that there. But long story short, yes, he finds himself on his way to New York and stays, this of course is a reference to him coming in supposedly on the 18th, but comes to New York. He stays at the Arlington Hotel, a very respected place in downtown. This is him. Norwegians? Anyone? Bueller? Oh, just a little.
Didn't you Google Translator on that?
I have used the Google Translate, yes I have. It gave me a very broken version, but essentially this is Mr. Hovden explaining that it is absolutely impossible for the fire to have begun in the smokehouse. 100%. He was like the fifth or sixth witness called, and he was at that point probably still convinced that he could convince the rest of the people. But he explains that there was a wooden structure right across from the place the fire would have started. If the fire had started there, that wooden structure would have certainly been burnt down, so there's no way it could have happened. He was only contradicted by 30 or 40 other people. And so, again, there is no certainty for sure, but he was on a boat out of town real fast. I will say that. So he comes to New York. He stays at the Arlington, very respected place, just shut down a few years ago, very, very famous place. But he spends 1904 wandering America, looking for a purpose. He goes through Chicago. He meets a fellow named Booth, Arthur Booth, not Frank Booth, but one of the Booth family, most importantly. And around 1905, things are really picking up here. Booth has got his thing going. Downtown is starting to actually have traffic problems. And meanwhile, right here on this spot, which has so far been back and forth, this piece of land has gone from the Pacific Improvement Company to the University of California system. And that's, of course, somewhat related to the idea that Mr. Stanford was involved with the Pacific Improvement Company, and eventually Stanford had a hand, I believe, back and forth between Stanford and Berkeley on this piece of land. But as Don has pointed out, and the thing that really gets me most excited about this, we're standing on the piece of land where it did all start. Now, it was a bounce back and forth. We've struggled for this land, whether it was going to be conservation or commerce. But I think we've reached an interesting balance. I think we're in a very good place for that. But at any rate, Jacques Loeb began his progress here. The fishing village, of course, as of about 1906, was no longer here. And while no one, of course, is certain what happened, there is a memo circulated from the Pacific Improvement Company approximately 8 days before this event that said, and I quote, "something has to be done," end quote. So while this tragedy is certainly regrettable, well, we can look forward to this, and that is that the laboratory that was next door over there at Lover's Point was able to move over here. And as it did, this area became, again, right on the border of Monterey and Pacific Grove, a place that was kind of within struggle of which way it was going to go. So you've got the birth of the fishing industry. This stuff comes in 1909. No one had really ever taken sardines seriously as a fish. Now the Norwegians, of course, they've been fishing small fish for many, many generations. Here, everyone's really interested in salmon, tuna, big things you can make a fillet out of. But here, well, Booth was willing to experiment, and his manager, Hovden, seemed to have a really good idea to make the experiment about 1909 with the sardines. I have not found an earlier record of people experimenting with the sardines before this, so I'm going to guess Hovden was at least the driving force. Now, Mr. Hovden, between these times, and I'm going to stay away from his personal life, to be honest, went over to England, married an old girlfriend from way back when named Marie Emma Siegert, and they had 2 children, both of whom were involved with the industry over many years. One of them ended up actually becoming the vice president at the end of the Hovden Cannery's life. But coming back to town, he finds himself with a little challenge, and that is that our friend Mr. Booth couldn't quite sell sardines. He was trying to sell sardines, but no one wanted sardines. Sardines have always been a real tough sell. And so a libel suit was brought by the government claiming that he couldn't get away with claiming those little fish in the cans were mackerel anymore. No one was familiar with the little sardines like that. They hadn't seen them before, so they were sold like so. Now, if you look really, really close, he tells you it's sardines right there in the fine print. But nonetheless, the government took it differently and said, no, you actually do have to call them sardines if they are sardinias. So he, in fact, had to turn around and change his whole labeling. But at the same time, like I said, this industry was really taking off Wharf 1 was basically all his. He ran up and down, or the space beside Wharf 1 most especially, Monterey Bay Company he had. And that's right across from where our offices are just today. So you've got all of this industry going on, the thing is finally catching up. He's trying to sell sardines. Will anybody just please eat sardines? He publishes a cookbook with some beautiful ideas in it. There's a sardine jello salad. You'll just have to try one of these days. Whatever it takes, you know, it's advertising. But about this time, Kay realized that he needed help. He saw the technology advancing, he saw where the industry was going, he saw this infinite potential, and most importantly, he brought with him several hundred years of experience and the technology and the techniques that they used in the North Atlantic. So his brother, Olav, was still over in Norway, comes over about this time. Olav was a mechanical genius, and Olav is really the guy responsible for all of those innovations that Kay Hovden's given so much credit for. Your head slicing machine for the entire processor that cuts off heads, tails, cooks the machine, cooks the fish automatically. All of those were essentially Olav's doing. So he comes here, and coincidentally, about the time he arrives, Mr. Booth patents a head cutting machine. Little fish go in the tubes, it goes cycling around, cuts off. Now, this has other people's names on it, but I will say for sure, it has Olav and Kay Hovden's fingerprints all over it. So about that time, somebody was proposing an aquarium. And they've been proposing aquariums around here for a very long time. The space down at Lover's Point was actually first pitched as an aquarium because the public would be able to view the animals that were in the inside. Here, Mr. Booth was really interested in getting an aquarium going as well. I talked to Dr. Webster, who tells me when he first came to Monterey, what was that, probably the 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, he said he came here and there was already an aquarium, and it was down on the wharf. It was one lonely looking little sea lion. So we've certainly made a step up, but the idea of having an aquarium has been part of the local culture just forever. So he tried to get it passed. Didn't happen. Mr. Hovden again tried to get an aquarium built in Pacific Road, 1925, another point I don't have enough time to really go into. But nonetheless, yes, we've been trying to do this for a long time. Everybody's, of course, very excited to have the Marine Lab come in at China Point at the same time. But there's very little business going on here. You've only got one or two companies going on, so Hovden decides to go for himself. He leaves Booth's employ. This is the lease dated September 11th, 17. Now, he had started his business about 1916 here on this lot, but officially got his lease on 17 for lot 14, block number 1, which is this little spot right here. $100 a year, 8 years, payable in advance. Oh boy, how real estate has changed. Now, in the beginning, of course, no one wanted sardines yet. So you could get just about anything canned by the Hovden Company. Yeah, that's true, huh? Yeah, he would can just about anything. And to be fair to the man, there was a time after the sardine industry did take off, it did take off, there was a time where the name Hovden was right up there with Dole, Libby, and Van Camp, recognized as one of those names on labels around the country. It's just that his name was on sardines, and that I think was one of his big challenges. So, at any rate, the company just gets started immediately. He begins a second company down in San Diego, because San Diego has a tuna business. Tuna is a much more reliable business than sardines, very safe business. He sends Olav down to Point Loma, San Diego, and starts Kay Hovden Company number 2. That business ended up being much more stable than the one here. As a matter of fact, it operated well into the 60s before it eventually got absorbed by a couple of other companies. But yep, that's what it would be like if you wanted to go to work for Kay Hovden in Point Loma about that time. I hear it's changed a little. So anyway, this is Olav, and Olav got put in charge down there. Nonetheless, he was still doing all of the technological improvements that needed to be done. Now, both Olav and Kay, right about this time, right about 1920, made trips back to Norway. I believe it's because there was a death in the family, very likely with their parents. But at any rate, when they came back from there, he was living on 6th Street in Pacific Road. It should be interesting. It's interesting to note, he's got half a dozen addresses over the years, but Hovden was never a rich man. And as I study these canners up and down the street, the people who owned the canneries, they were never really all that rich. They were struggling to get by, and they were lucky to be able to actually pay the people who were doing the fishing for them. They owned a few homes, but nothing all that fancy. It was very much it stayed working class, no matter whether you were on the top or the bottom of the chain of command, for sure. So at this point, Hovden negotiates a lease for the Herstein property and actually buys the land. And this was what, I think 1920, wasn't it? Where he actually sits down and says, I'm going to keep this piece of land. We're going to make ourselves the best cannery in the world. Hovden was always committed to making a better product. He wasn't out to outnumber his people. He didn't have to produce more. He didn't have to have more employees or even more industry. He was about making a better product. And his prices changed virtually not at all. From the beginning of the Hovden Cannery's opening to the end, prices changed almost not at all, because he was always focused only on the quality of the product and keeping it at a reasonable price. That was his plan on outnumbering the competition, kind of the old-fashioned way, for sure. But you could still make a lot of money here. You could make 4 cents a case labeling. You could make 40 cents an hour packing, an outrageous amount of money for this period of time in the 20s. Oh my goodness, quite a bit. So the Hovden line, the Hovden product, became very popular around the world. Olaf was able to create many more machines, everything from steaming machines to packing machines to canning machines. And at this time also, Kay was promoting sardines as a health food. They didn't have a whole lot of other angles. Here's some fish in a can. So, and it's funny that his pitch worked. It really did. By promoting the chemistry of what was in the sardines, in 1925, the FDA actually gave their approval. I'm sorry, not the FDA, excuse me. The AMA, the American Medical Association, said sardines are a health food. Look at all these fantastic minerals that are in there. And at that point, honestly, we were getting into health foods. Fish liver oil had just become a big deal. Cod liver oil, of course, was popular for years. Ed Ricketts, of course, was into shark liver oil rather extensively. But again, we're looking at something that is still fundamentally a green list fish. Please eat all the Pacific sardines you can. And then there were a couple of challenges. And over the years, there were a bunch of these challenges. Long story short, he had to be very careful. Kay Hovden had to be very careful. In this case, he had to make sure that the amount of fish to be used for reduction purposes was okay. Now, this is pretty common knowledge here among aquarium staff, but I don't know everybody else that might be in on it. About 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the sardines that were ever harvested in Monterey never went into cans. They were reduced into fish meal, and the huge percentage of that probably went right over the hills into the Salinas Valley. It was much cheaper to simply take all the fish, cook it down, turn it into fertilizer and animal feed, rather than have human beings sit there and hand pack single fish into single cans. So you could easily get in trouble for that. The government regulated it, said you could only do 20% or 30%, and those numbers went back and forth over the years. But long story short, they said you can't take people food, grind it up and feed it to animals. We need this food for people. So about 1925, he gets in trouble for that, right as he's getting sardine declared a health food, right at the same time. He gets shut down for a year. Can't do any more reduction on this property. Coincidentally, he just moved right across the city line to the other half of his property that was in Pacific Grove and simply moved his reduction operation over there. Very convenient. Yeah, he does a lot of things like that. But trying to expand was tough. Now, he went up and down the coast. He had places up in the Northwest. He had some cannery interests and reduction facilities in Oregon, several places in Oregon around Astoria, Tansy Point. Sausalito was not so receptive. Sausalito, we tried to establish a cannery there, and they said, wait a minute, it smells. Someone had noticed, and they sent a bunch of people from their city council, and they spent a weekend down here and had a great old time, and were shown the Del Monte and the 17-mile drive, and they had a wonderful time, but they came back going, did you notice the smell? So the people of Sausalito rightfully said, hey, we heard there was a smell. And so back and forth, honestly, between 1928 and 1938, he struggled. Eventually, he got himself a cannery built there. But yes, it took quite a few years, almost as long as it takes to get the second edition of a major educational book published. So from there, he's moving on. He's actually got something going on. 1930, he publishes How I Did It in West Coast Fisherman. He publishes the Hovden Method. That's about 10 pages of what temperature to steam it at, how long it sits in the steamer, what pressure the cacking machine works at, every single little detail you could ever want. So if you want to open a cannery in the old way, there's your instruction book. It's all right there. He spelled it out. And it's funny because you would think, why isn't he keeping the secret? He's got a superior technique. He knows it's a superior technique. And he put it out there and said, here, run with it. Do what you can. I've already done this. Can you improve on it? By the time he published this, he was already on to bigger and better things. So, the Monterey County Court, of course, here's where the reduction plant was ordered shut down for an entire year, a violation of the Fish Conservation and Reduction Act of 1919. He's bouncing around with that for a few years, keeps the thing operating. Honestly, 1928 was kind of a rough year around here for the sardine industry, but he bounces back by attending the World's Fairs. 1925, he attended the World's Fair. 1933 in Chicago, he got some recognition. He won some awards. Hovden Sardines got the Grand Prix at several of these international expositions, which is good news. He's got a couple of outside interests. He's traveling up and down the coast. He's now stretching all the way from Washington up to down to San Diego. The reduction question he got out of very, very simply, same way a lot of other reduction plants around here did. He simply took it offshore because he was in trouble. Well, they put together a bunch of very, very large boats, and once you're off the 2-mile limit, you can do whatever you want out there. Coincidentally, they fish for sardines out in the ocean, so it made for a shorter commute all the way around. But they had these big floating boats they would call floaters, floating reduction boats, and even though they were partially regulated here in California, he ran several of those up around the Columbia River, and even up north of there, up in Puget Sound as well. One of those was the Mazama, and I'm trying to summarize this really quickly because this will give you a good idea how Mr. Hovden operates. Hovden goes up north. He's got an interest in the fishing season up there. He thinks he's going to catch a bunch of sardines. He's got a floater ready to go. He invests into it with a few partners. It's called the Mazama Corporation, and he's the CEO. He orders some big industrial presses, 4 of them, for the reduction process, from somebody named Carl Reitz. Well, Carl Reitz is able to deliver 2 of them on time. 2 of them are going to be late. So Hovden says, well, that's fine. You give me the 2. I'll borrow 2 from the Hovden Cannery, and then you just ship the 2 when they're ready. Just ship them down to the Hovden Cannery to replace those 2 I borrowed. Makes perfect sense. It's a little shell game there, right? Well, they had a real disappointing season that year, and the Mazama Corporation went bankrupt after about 6 months, having made 1 payment. Well, coincidentally, Reitz is back here looking for, well, where's my money? Where are my presses? He goes to file a lawsuit. I'm sorry, that's the Mazama Corporation. That doesn't exist anymore. Although the floater, the Mazama, coincidentally ended up in Sausalito at Hovden's Sausalito plant right next to Carl Reitz's marine equipment shop. About 8 years later, he filed a second lawsuit, was struck down by the court, but I'm pretty sure he went over there and saw his presses on that boat. The Mazama eventually sank right there in Sausalito. But it gives you an idea of the creative accounting that's necessary sometimes in big business. Now, speaking of creative, Hovden had an idea. We could get more fish. So what we're going to do, this new technology, and indeed is a technological advancement, champion, he figures that if we put an electric charge in the water and just shock a school of fish into submission, we can put a big hose with a scoop and suck them up. Yeah, that was right where he went with it. Thankfully, the industry here did collapse before he was able to materialize this invention, but it gives you an idea just what they thought they were dealing with. It looked like an infinite supply of money, this infinite supply of fish coming out of there, and of course, we know they were all in for a few surprises. So, Hovden is still expanding. He's back and forth. Oh, that's right, this is his draft registration card. He did, like anyone else, have to register, and a lot of the paperwork that I've been able to track down is his official documents. He's moved on. He's got a site at Half Moon Bay, and about this time comes the only documented interaction between Mr. Ricketts and Mr. Hovden, and that is Mr. Ricketts writing that he wanted sharks. He was a great advocate of shark liver oil and was well known for taking the basking sharks. We're still asking where all the basking sharks went. The basking sharks, there used to be a lot of them in the bay. Ricketts was a big fan, and when he could find them, he would take their liver and use it for nutritional purposes. So at some point, at least, Mr. Hovden helped Mr. Ricketts obtain sharks. So I guess we don't need to really cover Mr. Ricketts' other associate, your well-known friend, Mr. Steinbeck, but I will say he did get a lot of attention around here, and not just from the locals, but that's another story. But moving on, we're trying to sell sardines here. Does anybody want some sardines? They're little fish in a can, they're delicious, they're nutritious. The American Medical Association says they're a health food. They did everything they could, but when it came right down to it, no one would buy. And about the time that they realized no one was buying, I'd say mid-40s, they were just hoping for the best. The military had come along with World War II, bought a whole bunch of sardines at a minimum profit level for the people here. So that was all gone, that was over. But looking around the mid-late 40s, catches are starting to decline. Hovden decides that one of the major influencing factors is that the military has been dumping munitions in the bay. Now, whether there's any science to this is entirely unproven, but he was absolutely certain that was a major cause of it. Now we know, of course, that natural temperature cycles also had a lot to do with the sardines' disappearance. But nonetheless, he was looking for reasons, and blaming the military, the government's always an easy target. So he's looking around, the industry is starting to collapse. Well, what is he going to do? Ricketts, of course, is publishing, I think it was 1948, 47, he published the article where everyone says, 1947, I think it was, he publishes the article where everyone says, where are the sardines? Well, they're in the cans. And that is, of course, I guess about 25 to 30% true, depending on if you count the reduction business. But at that point, no more sardines. Sardines were literally getting trucked in from Southern California. It went on for several years. They tried to keep the industries going, but nobody here was able to pull any more fish out of the bay. The sardines had quite simply become very untenable as a source of income. So, Hovden expands a little bit what he can. He opens up a hopper and a small cannery up at Santa Cruz. More or less, he's contracting out with the other big fisheries, trying to do anything he can. At this point, he turns to canning anything he could. You'll see, even if you look at our boiler area, he's turned to squid, artichoke hearts, hearts of palm, anything he could get his hands on just to keep the doors open. And you'll find that happened through the Hovden Cannery's last 3 or 4 decades, for sure. They were hobbling along, and they do whatever was necessary. So, between 1947 and 1948, the landings dropped by difficult percentages, essentially putting us all here into a desolated, abandoned, former industrial area. So times are tough. We're looking at 1950. There's no more fish out there. We have industry moving in, but it's the tourist industry. With no more fish here, you've got, I don't know if any of you probably were here in the last 30 or 40 years, but there was a time period when I first got here that this end of Cannery Road, there wasn't much here. Still some old scary buildings, kind of a sketchy area. It stayed that way, of course, for a long time. But as it was disappearing in 1960, Mr. Hovden was just passing away. Now, the story of his demise is of some debate, but I'm going to quote Tim Thomas, who is absolutely certain and convinced that this depiction is accurate. So it's 1951. They had a brief sardine season. Just a little, just enough to pay a few bills. Hovden wants out of the business, so he finds some guys who are going to buy the business from him. But he's in deep trouble with the IRS and a bunch of other creditors. If he takes a check to the bank is going to report that to the IRS. So he finds these guys want to buy the business. He says, I want $100,000 and I want it in cash. Okay? So the guys come up with this cash. They show up, they give him the cash. What's he going to do with a bunch of cash? He took it probably right over there to a canning machine, put $100,000 into sardine cans, packed them into a case, put that case in his trunk, and drove to Mexico. Never to set foot on American soil again. He died about 10 years later, 1961, in Guadalajara of a heart attack. His remains were sent to Olaf, who at that time was still in Southern California, albeit quite senior. And you can still find this online. It's very easy. His death certificate is out there. So he lays right over there, not too very far from us. But in a way, he's not just there, he's here. He's very much one of the reasons that we're all here. Had he not done what he did, when he did it, I doubt our industry would have picked up. Without his technological advancements, I don't think the industry would have turned Monterey into Cannery Row before the demise of the sardines in the mid-late 40s. So we've had a few transitions since then. This place needed a facelift very badly from the late 70s. And today, finally, we've watched it transition into the perfect balance of conservation and commerce, just the way Kay would have preferred it. Thank you very much. Any questions at all? Okay, good, we covered it. Yes, sir.
I have a aquarium.
Aquarium story, I love these.
So Ricketts wants to move next door to Hopkins, and Steinbeck's gonna help pay for the lab. It's gonna be open. And they wanna have an aquarium open on the weekends. But somebody writes, I think it's the director of Hopkins, says, well, we're gonna have to charge by 25 or 50 cents because there's gonna be droves of children that wanna come to this. So that's yet another idea for an aquarium.
There were a number of attempts over the years until finally something took root.